Blessed be to your day. May it be everything you require to create everything you desire. I wanted to drop, before we get in, you know how we always do. Before we get into this week's episode of the God Hour podcast, which we're going to get into regurgitating regression. I wanted to get into regression. Really understanding what regression is. This mindset with ourselves of anxious attachments and the fear of vulnerability. I dropped a little about it yesterday when I was talking about where one is not willing. And I talked about it also in the pod. I talked about it in the lecture on Friday. Where one is not willing, one will seek reaction over responsibility. This is the aspects of the what versus the why, or the kinetic, which is repetition, versus the potential, which is the chaos, the conflict, the learning, and where we learn from. So it made me really think about anxious attachments and understanding anxious attachments and that fear, that vulnerability. You get to a point. I remember getting to that point, and this point you come to a lot of times. Every time that it's time to find your worth. A lot of times we think about it in finding our worth. Everybody wants to make it seem like it's this, oh my God, it's so beautiful, and oh my God, it's not. Those first steps into your darkness, those first steps into there is you're now removing the anxious attachments or the things that you used to filter your vulnerability. All throughout this week's lesson is going to be deep in the things we use to filter our vulnerability, our sustainability inside of a space. You're already in balance. We understand this aspect. You don't find balance. You're already in balance. The key to you staying in this certain balance or aptitude or this space is becoming honest with the fact that you are in balance and taking ownership in what you're in balance of. You have to look at it. You have to take it like this. Everything, if I'm suppressing, the difference between suppressing and repression. Repression is the conscious act, or is the act of me willingly trying to keep things down by the wayside, not deal with things, Grand Rising, not deal with things, keep things pushed down, but I just keep creating these negative impulses that feed it. Suppression is me willingly do this same thing, and everything outside of me is forcing me to face it. Remember, you're in balance. So like anything from the aspects of you being guilty, you having insecurity, you having that doubt, whatever you're not dealing with, something outside of you in this space of duality to keep you within that balance, you choose which way you want to go. The things over here are going to keep you blaming everything else. And everything out here in that same space, the opportunity or the obstacle is going to force you to really look at yourself. But this is where we face that avoidant attachment. It's something similar as when you look at your laptop, you look at your phone, you depend on that device more than you depend on yourself. Think about how you are now. Think about what it is now when you're thinking about your aspects of your phone, your device that you use, wherever you keep everything stored at. How much of the information do you have on hand? Like, for example, I purposely lock my laptop. Every time I hop off my laptop, when I know I ain't gonna be on it for like that night or whatever, when I close out, I literally shut down my laptop. I sign out. That way, every time that I wake up, I have to put my password in. This is to help me learn my password, to remember that password. My phone, same difference. This is you coming into this aspect so you do not have to, because when things start falling apart, that tower, when shit start falling apart, the first thing that you thinking about is, oh my God, I need to run upstairs and get my phone. Oh my God, I got to run upstairs and get my laptop. Oh my God, I got to run up there and get this, this, and this. You're in that state. Remember, this is that state of reaction where you're not willing. You will always you always seek the reaction. Where I'm not willing to become intimate with myself in an aspect of learning myself, I will always seek the reaction to the what. Or me always saying, well, I did this, did that. But I'll never get to a point of saying, why did I do that? Why has this been my ongoing aspect of my life? Why do I do this all the time? Why is this my go-to? Why do I, every time I get to a certain point, most times out of 10, because we'll tell ourselves, I feel guilty if I don't do it. I feel insecure, my worth, my value. We always put it, remember that filtering our vulnerability through something external. Where I'm not willing to learn an aspect of myself, I always created something that would be my vulnerability. So now I'm always, remember, there's that state of reaction. So I'm thinking about my job. I'm at my job. I'm making money at my job. The moment that my money, exactly, self-sabotage. The moment that my job cuts my hours, says I can't come into work, COVID, whatever it is, now I'm gonna react. I'm angry. My worth is being challenged, and now I'm sitting there upset. Now here's the reality to it. I was already upset. I was already in doubt. I was already insecure. I was already feeling guilty. I was already that emotion. That's when you think about the first step, and when I tell people, like, when it comes to doing this internal work, first step you got to admit is you benefited from that traumatic experience. You benefited from that because it gave you the space for you to create what it was so you can mask whatever emotion it was in the space. That relationship didn't make you insecure. Exactly, it came to the surface. That relationship didn't make you insecure. You were already insecure. No matter what they did, that was the result or the experience that you needed to trigger you, to force you to become present with yourself. The longer that you stay not dealing with it, the longer you keep doing the same shit over and over and over again. You can be mad at every chick that you've ever been with, or all your homegirls, because you got a homegirl that steals men. You got a homeboy that be stealing niggas' girls. But you like the way that made you feel, because now you can use that as, I wish I could do that. And it's not even, I talked about this in the lecture, it's not even what they're doing. It's the way that they can use that emotional underline to do that. It's the way that they can mask, it's a way that they can mask their insecurity. It's the way that they can mask that guilt, that feeling. So you're looking at that, you're like, I wish I could do that. I wish I could sustain myself inside of that space. But remember, everything's in balance. So what's the root to it? So if they're doing that out of guilt, they got a heavy ass guilt wound from like seeing from the aspects of their father had multiple people around, multiple girls around them or their mother. They got their mother hanging around with that aspect. They kept doing that. And then you saw that. You created an example. But this is the point of reaction. It's not for me to pass judgment on them wanting $40 in a gram. It's not to pass the judgment. It's to understand why that bothers me. It's to understand what about that identity scares me? Because when it boils down to it, like, you'll judge them and be like, you must be guilty about some shit, or you insecure, or whatever. And then you find yourself, everything in your environment starts to reflect it. Whether you go watch YouTube videos, or you go watch a YouTube video, or you go find a post that's talking about something, you always find something to feed your insecurity, to feed that information. That's how things attach to you. It attaches based on that lower state. Remember, the highest state, peace, your peace, being intimate, me finding balance has nothing to do with my peace. Me finding balance, you're not finding balance, you're already in balance. It's just dealing with those internal conflicts that you have, keeping yourself in balance. The longer that we don't do that, the longer you start to regress. That's why every time you step outside of your comfort zone, or you thought you stepped outside of your comfort zone with the intention of, I'm gonna love, I'm gonna do this, and you step outside of your you said that you stepped out of your comfort zone, the information is still there. Exactly. That's the compassion point. But the longer that I stayed, I noticed the longer that I stayed within that space, it was only to mask my own shit so I can regress. I would naturally stay in spaces that would not challenge me. So now you're looking at your job and you're talking about you want more money at your job, or you want to do something more at your job. But they keep throwing the manager position at you or the supervisor position at you. They keep hitting you with that, like, hey, maybe you should do this. But now you gotta, that's that, and we don't get deep into this in the podcast. You have to step out of the employee mentality. Remember, I'm talking about this LLC mentality. You gotta step out of the employee mentality. You gotta step into that manager mentality. That means the employee mentality is a liability. Think about it, as an employee, you are a liability. Everything from the insurance, everything that they got to pay to keep you in that space, you are a liability. A lot of us move in that liability mindset. That's the lack mindset. That's the not assessing myself. But when when you come into this manager mindset, you're learning to manage your liabilities. Because remember, everything is a reflection of you. So I'm now learning how to manage my own liabilities. When I master my liabilities, and where I was a liability, now I can become that asset. Because as long as I'm a liability, I search for assets. That's when you look at everything inside your space, where you want to rent everything. You'll go rent the car, you go rent this, you go try to get this chick, try to go get this nigga. You trying to you looking for assets. But you a liability. So it always comes at that high cost. What's that high cost? That's that's my emotional literacy. Remember, the byproduct of everything in your physical is based in your emotional literacy. The less I understand about myself, the less I understand my emotional credit score. And we got into this before. The less I understand my emotional credit score, where my emotions are at, the more that I avoid my wounds, I'm always going to pay a high price for everything that I'm trying to bring into my space. So I never learned efficiency. I live in this space of quantity. That way, every time, because remember, think about it like this. If I'm in a hustle mentality and I'm not thinking about alignment, as I hustle, what's the baseline of a hustler? Lack mentality. That means if I lose it, I can get it again. So I'm going to lose all my liabilities and I can gain them liabilities back. But as long as I am in that mindset, I'm in that cycle. I stay in that cycle. That means I'm always going to need to go back to square one, or have that memory of the memory of my childhood from not being struggling in the streets and struggling And every time I go back to that point, every time I regress back to that point, whether it happens in a physical sense, whether you got to go move back with your mom, you got to go move back with your folks, move back with people, that's you regressing. The key is me to sit in that space and accept that space. Because it don't matter, and I'm going to paint this picture real quick. It does me no good in a current state. I was listening to my man, Jack Taylor. It does me no good to, from the space that I came from. Let's say your parents or your mom took out a second loan or took out a title loan or took out a loan on her house to help you go to college. Now you go to college. Or you go to the finishing school or whatever. You go to school. Okay. Now you get out of school. Your first thoughts will be, I need to get a house and a car. I need to get a house and a job. What's stopping you from going back home? Your mom then took out 9 loans on the house. Your mother then took out 9 loans on the house to make sure you went to school. What's stopping you from getting a job and dealing with that first? That's the example of going back, and that's the example of doing your internal work. It does me no good in my current state if I'm not dealing with the things that are assessed in my past. Because those will always need to exist for me to sit in that space. Think about every story you hear on the news. Think about every story you hear about the black kid and he overcame all the odds and he bought his mom a house. The little girl, she overcame the odds and she bought her mom a house, bought their dad a house, bought him that business. And now they in that state of success. That would be the equivalent to that aspect of yourself. Because I remember going back to the points in time and not really understanding how to do that aspect because of my emotional literacy. Because in reality, the traumatic experiences that I've been through, I'm still using or I'm still reliving through. Those would cause those anxious attachments. Those are what I filter my vulnerability to, or my fear to be vulnerable with myself, being open and honest with myself. Because I always had something I can go to. Every time I was triggered, forced to be emotionally present, I can be like, man, you know how I came up. You knew my life, what my life was. You know where I came up. And I can just keep saying that. I can always regress. I can keep it repressed. I can keep suppressing shit. I can keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And just keep growing myself inside of attachments. So I never really learned anything. I never really healed. I just kept running forward. I wasn't integrating. I talked about this on Friday during the lecture. As long as you got this space in between your shadow and your identity, you'll always have something that's going to fill into this space, this emotional current. You always going to have something that's going to be able to drop into that space. Whether it's the chick that you got with, and every time you talk about your issues, what was your intention behind telling her your issues? The brother that you tell your issues, what was your intent behind telling them your issues? Because a lot of times we come into that space and we figure if we talk about it, there's a difference between me talking about some things or bringing some stuff to the surface and actually allowing myself to assess it. There's a difference. There's a difference between me talking about my issues. It's all based in the intention. If my intention is to speak about the things that I've been through, my intention is to learn how to sit within that emotion that comes up. My intention is not going to be based on, I'm going to tell everybody my problems, but I ain't got no way to market it. Because that's basically what motherfuckers actually keep doing. You just marketing your trauma. A lot of times staying in that regressive state, you just market your trauma. Now you made an album, you sing the same song, now you got a book, now you got the book deal, now you going on tour based on your traumas. That's the vacations, that's all the escapes. You then created a whole tour for your book. And then you just keep doing that over and over and over again. all the way until you turn, now you would get to a certain age, you expect to have certain things inside of that space. It don't matter what you put inside that space, because it's all going to be resulted based off that emotional aspect. It's always going to be resulted on that emotional aspect every time. If you are deep within regret and guilt and you ain't forgiving yourself, everything you create, everything you bring into your space is going to be based on that same emotional aspect. Think about the things. If you have children, you got kids. Think about where you were at when your kid, and I've broken this down before. Think about the emotional traumatic event that happened to you in your life. Let's say some shit happened to you when you were 11 years old. Whether it was a very deeply rooted trauma, sexual trauma, whatever it was, something happened to you at 11 years old. You are stuck at 11 years old. You are stuck at 11 years old emotionally. Now let's say you go through your life and now you bring it to your space and now you have a child. Now you have a child that is 11 years old. They will reflect in correspondence and equivalent to the shit that happened to you at 11 years old. The same shit the equivalent to the shit that happened to you. That one time you tried to tell your mom something about yourself. That's something that happened to you with your uncle or your whatever. And that same guilt that your mother used on you is the same thing you're going to say to them, even in avoidance. Because now you're going to talk to them in the same way. Even though you paraphrased it, you're going to use, it's the same guilt that's in it. Let's use it for an example. Your mother guilted you into because that man that was in y'all life was giving y'all some money or paying the bills. So now in this current state with yourself, your daughter tells you or your son tells you about something about being pressured in a sexual manner. And then you react in that same instance because it's something you haven't dealt with. Or you get into that relationship around the same age plan and you keep reacting to the same thing. It's because you're still stuck within the repressive memory where you've come into a space, especially when you come into a space that's actually someone that's learned how to manage a certain aspect of themselves. It's going to make you the most uncomfortable. It made me the most uncomfortable in spaces where I really had to sit down. Remember, we talked about it on Friday. The lecture is up on my YouTube channel, G.O.D Alchemist. You have to become impartial in removing your biases. That is the way you become emotionally present in every space. That means you're able to see in the space, even it's not about the right or wrong. It's about understanding where every time I tell a story, I always tell it from a certain point. So now everybody in my space, 9 times out of 10 is going to tell me the story from the same point. I'm not telling people my beginning. When I look into a space, like when I'm dealing with my clients, when I'm talking to my clients, doing consultations, I want to hear the beginning. I can tell when someone's starting from the middle because it's usually during that middle point, that's when you getting excited and you like, yo, so I was going to bust somebody's head to the white meat, or I was going to hit old girl in the mouth, or I bleached it. You telling me from the middle point, what's the beginning? Let's find the beginning point to that story. What was the base of your relationships? Because a lot of our relationships, they start with the intent to hide our guilt. They start with the intent to hide the insecurity. They start with the intent to hide the jealous, to hide this aspect of us. So you try to put all of that in the beginning of the relationship. You try to put all that in the beginning of your job. Whether you don't check a certain box, or you say don't call back to this job, you naturally in every space always put yourself in a state of reaction where you're not willing to learn yourself. You always look for the reaction instead of taking that responsibility. That responsibility is where you're going to find that true value of yourself. That's what's in that dark aspect. Give you an example. I'm an empath. But I had to learn just me saying that, I had to learn the lessons of bringing myself into the balance to be able to use, not ignore the feeling, but understanding what that feeling is. It's not about me avoiding my guilt. It's about me sitting in that guilt. It's about me sitting in that guilt. It's about me sitting in my insecurity. It's about me sitting in that darkness. It's about me going into that hell loop. It's about me going into that darkness, going into that hell loop, and deal with everything that I created or I had my hand in creation that I used to deal or to cope with my guilt. That's the only way I can master that. A lot of times you looking inside your space, you thinking about the peace aspect. I'm at peace. If you at peace, that means whoever walk up to you cannot upset you. Period. Knowing they can't upset you, they can't make you feel any type of way. They can't make you react. You can respond, but you're not going to react. And that's one of the lessons, that's an ongoing lesson in your shadow work. Even after you've integrated with that, even when you brought that demon to the present state and you integrated with that and you using it to move forward, now you got to go through the observation process. You'll know when you done, you know when you stuck at a certain point because you got to keep going back to that point. That's a part of you. The point is not to stay in that state of regression with yourself. A lot of us to stay in that state of regression, that behavioral pattern. Every time somebody upset me, I go drink. Every time somebody, I just further suppress it. I don't want that coming to the surface. But as I'm always speaking on, from your darkness is your absolute. From the nothing is your absolute. So whatever's in that cave, whatever's in that cabin, whatever's in that void, that's what you have to deal with. Because that's what creates your space. That's what creates the corresponding result outside of you. So if you're inside of your environment and you see a lot of conflict going on, maybe it's time to assess your conflicts. If you see a lot of things that's making you insecure or triggering that insecurity, triggering that hurt, it's only from the deepest aspects of you. The deeper that it makes you, the deeper the hurt, the deeper the shadow, the deeper down into your darkness you must go. These lessons, I remember going through those lessons early on, just coming to that certain point. That shit changed a lot of things. I stopped looking at things through the bias. That means I'm not looking at things based on bitches ain't shit, niggas ain't shit, that person ain't this person ain't that, this ain't that, this ain't that. That's not what this is. It's being able to sit in those spaces. It's being able to understand my lesson. Okay, that's all that it is. If I react to it, therefore, if I react to it, there's something inside of me that is a part that is creating that. That's giving me that aspect to see. I got a choice to make. Either I'm going to deal with it or I'm going to keep avoiding it. I'm going to keep getting anxious. I'm going to keep getting overwhelmed. That means it's time to sit in it. The higher that overwhelm, the higher that anxious, the higher that emotion come up, it's time to sit with it. That trigger forces you to become emotionally present. Yeah. This week in the God Hour podcast, we don't get deeper into that. We're going to get into this regurgitating repression. We're going to get into that regurgitating repression. The acts of the duality or understanding the duality between the suppressing and the repression that we stay stuck in within that polarity. A lot of times we go through a space where the repressed memories create points of suppression. Or if you're stuck in the suppression aspect on this end, now you're looking at everything that you're trying to repress. The key is bringing those things to that middle point. Understanding what it was. Tapping into it and listening to myself. But we don't get deep into that in the God Hour podcast. I desire you to be the fucking best. I'm always going to desire you to be the fucking best. Because that's what I desire of myself. I desire you to embrace what you're becoming. Everything from readings, consultations, natal chart analysis, human design analysis, and many, many other products, services. Hit me up in the inbox. Hit me up in the DM. Let's get an appointment set up. I desire you to be the fucking best. I love you. We love us. Welcome to the darkness. Ashe.